Hi, I'm Igor Volsky.
I'm Michelle Jawando.
And we're talking to you just hours after the Senate finally released their top secret healthcare bill. And shocker, it's about as bad as we expected.
I mean, I think we heard Donald Trump say a few weeks ago, don't let the Senate bill be as mean as the House bill.
Yeah, give it more heart.
Yeah, make sure it had more heart. Well, what came out today is clear that this, in many ways, is an abomination. It is a monstrosity. There is a callousness here, particularly when you think about the deep and severe Medicaid cuts in this bill. I think about the fact that 69% of older Americans who are living in nursing homes today are there because of Medicaid.
And this bill really guts Medicaid in a way that the House bill didn't even do. It changes the formula through which the federal government doles out money to the states to give states less money over time, which means states are going to have to cut back on their Medicaid program, which means millions of low-income Americans are going to lose coverage. Now, before going on air, Michelle and I made a list of the top 5 worst things in the Senate bill. We had a hard time because there's a lot of bad stuff in here.
There's a lot that you can choose from. It's like a grab bag of mean.
Yeah. But here's our ranking. Number 1, guts Medicaid. We mentioned that. Number 2, revokes essential benefits. That means insurers no longer have to cover things like maternity benefits or cancer treatment. Number 3, guts the prevention fund by $4 billion. Investing in prevention is a way to reduce and save costs down the road to prevent those diseases before they become costly chronic conditions. Number 4, charges old people a lot more for coverage, 5 times more. And finally, people with pre-existing conditions are pretty much screwed because if states allow insurers not to provide coverage for essential health care benefits, that means if you have a condition that needs to be treated, a pre-existing condition, that means you're going to see significant cost increases. And by the way, insurers classify things like acne a pre-existing condition.
Or like me, I've had 3 children.
Pre-existing condition.
You know, this country, we're in the throes of an opioid epidemic. Pre-existing condition.
Yeah. And our guest today, Jon Miller, was born with cystic fibrosis, also a pre-existing condition, and very hard and costly to manage with a bill that takes away those kinds of protections.
And this bill, I have to say it, Igor, disproportionately targets women.
Yeah.
Whether we're talking about essential health benefits, pre-existing conditions, or the defunding of Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood is a healthcare provider for women and young girls all across this country, and men.
And the fact of the matter is, not having insurance literally causes people to die. We just released an analysis in the last couple of hours, which finds that we'll see 217,000 additional deaths over the next decade, including 28,000 additional deaths in 2026 alone.
You know, I think we often forget the human impact of what a significant change this would be, and who are the faces and the families, how their stories are intertwined with what's happening on Capitol Hill every day. And that's why I'm so excited. Joining us to really talk about that human impact is Jon Miller from Meriden, Connecticut. Jon is here with us on Thinking Cap. Hey, Jon.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Jon, we're so happy to actually talk to a real person.
Yeah.
Somebody.
Wait, people talk to people in Washington?
What is that?
You wouldn't know it, right, these days. But I want to talk about, first of all, how you became involved in this issue, and talk a bit about your health condition, why you are one of the millions of Americans who need access to health care to survive.
Sure. Yeah. Well, as you guys are going to find out quickly, you know, my passion for this issue is more or less something I was born with. I was born with a condition called cystic fibrosis. It's a genetic disease, so obviously it's something that you're born with. But the thing about, a disease like this is that it's literally from day one, it's life-threatening. It requires, dozens of medications a day. It's, hospital stays, IV antibiotics, surgeries, all that stuff, all throughout the year, every year of your life. So, anybody who, even if you're not familiar with what that tends to involve and what that's all about, anybody who's listening can quickly figure out, oh, that sounds expensive. And the truth is, it's outrageously expensive. And unless you're a multimillionaire, to have an illness like this that's this serious and requires this much work just to keep you going, you won't be able to afford it without health insurance. I know for me specifically, I could see as much as 6-figure, maybe more, medical bills in a single year if I didn't have health care coverage. So obviously, the thing you learn quickly is that health insurance and having that in your life is number one priority, no matter what. Everything else comes secondary. So that's where, I was fortunate that as I sort of became a young adult, that was right at the time that the Affordable Care Act was being passed. And it created that safety net that somebody like me needed, that to know that, hey, no matter what happens to you, you'll be able to get the coverage that you need. So that's why I'm here to sort of continue to share my story and to help defend everybody's health care, because it really is a life and death issue.
Jon, would you say you were really engaged in kind of policy fights or really advocacy work before the ACA?
Well, that's a good question. I was a teenager at the time when that was passed. I was just turning about 20, so it was something that I was becoming aware of. I was still on my parents' plan at that time, but it really wasn't something that I felt like, hey, I need to be really dialed into this. I always assumed
I need to be an expert in health policy at 19.
Exactly. I knew how health insurance worked then, but even then, somebody like me, even though it's so important, was kind of always just like, hey, they'll figure it out. I trusted the government, trusted everybody to make sure that they weren't taking health care away from me. But obviously that was, naive of me to think that it seems so simple, such a simple request that, hey, don't take our health care away. But yeah, in those days I was not as engaged. But obviously everything's changed in the last few months. And I'm happy to have had all the experience that I have and all the knowledge I have of how the healthcare system actually works, not how people tell you it works, and be able to share all that information with people so that we can all make the best decisions for everybody.
Before it became law in 2010, were you worried, were your parents worried about what was going to happen to your healthcare coverage as you grew older? Since, it's unclear before the ACA, you would have to get a job with a good healthcare plan. I mean, how did that, as someone with a serious chronic condition that needs to be treated on a regular basis, how that guided your decisions in the pre-Obamacare world?
Yeah, that's the exact point. Is that even in those days, as I said, I was not quite as engaged, but I knew going into the workforce that I needed to have health insurance, and that was still before the ACA had been passed. So in those days, I needed to basically just say, okay, I either need to be a full-time student, or I need to find a full-time job, any job that gives a robust health plan. So it really limited what I felt my options were. Luckily, as I said, for me, right around that time was when the ACA was first passed. And here in Connecticut, even before all the laws were set up, we were allowed to pass legislation that allowed people to stay on their parents' plan until they were 26. So I kind of got to benefit from that right off the bat. And it really made all the difference in my life. It gave me all the freedom I needed to pursue different educational opportunities, to pursue different types of jobs, working part-time, seeing what worked for me, because obviously I had a lot of physical limitations. I wasn't even sure necessarily what my capacity was in the workforce or in academics. So it gave me so much freedom just knowing that, oh, okay, I don't have to worry about my health plan. I'm good. I've got a few years to figure it out. And, once if I do need to fall back on, say, the marketplace, that's going to be set up and ready to go. So it literally made, all the difference in the world for somebody like me to have that freedom to pursue the life I wanted and make the type of impact that I felt I was capable of making. And that's exactly what it happened. It allowed me to eventually find my career and make a positive impact that I always wanted to make.
It's like a very liberating
I
feeling,
know.
you know.
I mean, it makes me wonder, John, even as we have this conversation today, I mean, and it's so clear to hear your passion, but what it must have been like over the last year to see two distinctly different candidates with a vision of healthcare in this country. One running on supporting the ACA, but wanting to make some more aggressive changes to even open it up for even additional help, and one who was running explicitly on repealing this healthcare that you had come to know and use. What was that like, just kind of watching that? And then when you saw the election results on November 9th, what was your kind of first thought?
Sure. Yeah, it was, as you said, it was kind of this odd sort of contrast all last year, sort of watching, like you said, these two very different messages on healthcare, which was always confusing to me because when I would hear people describe, often from the more conservative approach to healthcare, what they were saying didn't add up with what my experiences were with the healthcare industry and how it all works and what the real ways of saving costs are. So it revealed to me just how willing a lot of politicians were to, over these last 5, 6, 7 years since the ACA had been passed, to just misinform people and grab onto a narrative and describe healthcare in a way that wasn't true. And because the average person, unless you have a serious illness, you really don't think about health insurance much. You don't really plan how it all works. You don't really need to know that. And I'm happy for people who don't, because that's the way it should be. But if you're not aware of how it works, it leads you open to that sort of misinformation. And it became frustrating to sort of see people sort of get lied to. And one of the things that I think, one of the few good things that has come out of this very lopsided approach to changing our healthcare laws is that America's gotten smarter. People are dialed into this. They're finally realizing, wait. I get how this works now, and what you've been telling me these last few years isn't true. And that's why you're seeing, polls for the ACA are so much higher. That's why the average American now wants the ACA to be improved, not repealed, because it's just everything that they've been told. They're realizing, wait a second, this isn't what I signed up for. So it's been, as you said, a very strange process. But I think even through all this back and forth and this fight, Americans have finally really learned how healthcare works. And that's why you're seeing, even with an entirely Republican Congress and White House, they can't get a bill passed very easily, if at all. So I think that people are starting to realize how it works. So that's been an interesting process to watch unfold.
And it's probably part of the reason why they have kept the process behind closed doors, because they know if it saw the light of day and there were actual debates, actual hearings on the impacts of the bill, this process that they've put in place, this goal that they set for themselves for the last 7 years, would fall apart pretty quickly. Jon, let's get specific, though. If you were sitting in front of, let's say, the Senate Finance Committee, which typically takes up healthcare legislation, had lots of hearings when they were passing Obamacare in 2009, 2010, but let's say you were asked to testify, how would you tell the chairman of that committee, which I think is Orrin Hatch, if I'm not mistaken, from the senator from Utah, how would you tell him repealing the law, repealing Affordable Care Act, how it would impact you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of the people who, if you don't replace this law with something that's well thought out and meant to protect people, it could kill me. I'm one of those people in that boat. I mean, I mentioned earlier all of the medications that it takes daily, all the procedures it takes. My health is, luckily, because of all the work I'm able to do, reasonably stable. But it's kind of like a Jenga tower where if you pull just one little bar out, if it's the wrong one, it all falls apart. And for somebody like me, if I were to suddenly not be able to get my medications daily, I could be dead within weeks. It literally happens that fast. So, I mean, obviously, there's been so much frustration with trying to get that message registered with our politicians. I'm not sure if it's that they don't understand that that's the reality or if they just don't care. And honestly, I'm not sure which is even worse. But, it's hard as somebody who's watching, who understands the healthcare system and understands how people rely on it all across the country, in all states, red and blue states, it doesn't matter. People depend on this for their lives, and they're able to make meaningful contributions to, to the country, to the economy, because they can, keep their health going. They can keep working. They can keep making that type of impact that they want to make. And, without these laws to protect our health, that all goes away. All the medical research that patients like myself are doing, all that we report back to our doctors, that's help finding a cure, that all disappears. All the medications that are being developed that are very expensive at first when they're released, those stop getting funded. It's such an issue that goes beyond even just protecting people's health and lives, which you'd think would be enough, but just in case it's not, this is, the healthcare system is 1/6 of our economy, and if you're going to just completely dismantle it, you're going to cause serious, irreparable damage to a lot of human lives here in America. And that's what makes me most sad and most frustrated, and that's what keeps me doing interviews like these, talking to whoever I can, just to get people to realize and understand just what's at stake. And it's very sad and frustrating, but hopefully, we've made a lot of progress so far, and we can keep that fight going and eventually get this figured out and done right.
So, Jon, you're a millennial
Yes.
in your 20s, and there's always this conversation that happens, and it's usually around elections, but are millennials and young people engaged, and they don't turn out, and they don't really, care about these issues. And you seem to stand in stark contrast to all of that. Why are you kind of in this kind of resistance fight? We spend a lot of time on Thinking Cap just trying to get to the core of why people engage and do their work. And obviously you have a powerful story, but are there things that you're doing with other young people to bring them into this work and getting them engaged in your story or in your fight around healthcare policy in this country?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question also. I think that one of the things that the election results in November demonstrated to us, maybe not, it's nothing new, but I think it's a reminder, is that, for all people, but I think especially for millennials too, is that if the issues don't touch your lives, if it's not something that day to day, week to week, there's a tangible difference that and consequence that you see, that you tend to just, here in America, we have this, we'll get through it, we'll figure it out, we'll, pull up our bootstraps and it'll all work out, kind of mentality. And that's a good thing, often. But I think that we've learned that you really need to reach out to people's lives and show, positive or negative change, depending on what the policies are, to really spur people to say, hey, yeah, I want to get on board with that. And again, I think if there was one good thing that might have happened from these past election results, is that millennials may not have been engaged before, but they are dialed in now. They are the loudest ones out there on social media saying, this is not what I signed up for. This is not the country I want to live in. And I think it's important to kind of channel that and to make sure that it's understood why people are feeling that way and what the issues are that are making them feel that way, and use that frustration, that anger that I certainly feel and other people feel, and find a way to use it to be productive and not just yelling and being outraged. That's helpful in its own right, but until you take that and find a way to channel it and make positive change, like we've seen so far already, I think that's when you really get people of all generations dialed in and ready to go, when they say, what, this is my life we're talking about, this is my health, this is my environment, this is my country, I want to make this right. And I think you're seeing what that can do when people really feel like it's their lives that are on the line.
Jon Miller, one of the most passionate, articulate voices in this healthcare fight. It's a pleasure having you on Thinking Cap. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Jon.
Well, thank you guys. Anytime. Always happy to help.
If you have a story that we should feature on Thinking Cap,
email us at thinkingcap@americanprogress.org. We want to hear from you.
Thinking Cap is produced by Sally Tucker. Music by Kyle Epstein and Jacob Buchanan. Graphics by Matt Ingram. For more, find us at Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, and at AmericanProgress.org, or wherever you want.